KwaZulu-Natal is still picking up the pieces from the devastating floods that hit the province. Earlier this month, Premier Sihle Zikalala said the province requires 5.6 billion rand to fix damage to roads. Although no one could have predicted this natural disaster, the government has been criticized for not doing enough maintenance on key infrastructure. For more on this, I'm joined by Lungisa, Sishuba, who's Managing Director of Onset Construction, and Johan, Olivier, the CEO of Ilifa Africa Engineers, who joins us on Skype now. Lungisa, I'll start with you. Now, the recent floods in KZN have again showed the impact on human lives, leaving families devastated and a total collapse of some major infrastructure. Speak to us firstly about what you've noted, especially when it comes to the seemingly poor infrastructure in the province.
Historically, yeah, it is a problem in our country, specifically the KZN and the Eastern Cape, because of the past history.
Yeah.
Our country, you cannot mention our infrastructure issue without mentioning the spatial planning and your historical disadvantages that our people have been exposed to. Right now, the challenge is obviously the spatial planning.
Yeah.
The landscape of the area is mainly rural, and there's no subsoil drainages and surface stormwater management in the area. So those are the attributes that are attributed to this. And the major key point is also the climate change. We cannot ignore that. The climate change is caused by all sorts of effects, but it's not prevalent in South Africa. It's prevalent in the Asia-Pacific area. But now we're slowly seeing that these changes are affecting us. And I think we cannot blame. This is not a blame situation, but it is what we have. It's the history meeting the current situation. We have to put measures in place to mitigate the problems, but it is the spatial planning we can identify, and also the weather patterns changing.
But at a structural level, would you say that we're also dealing with the old infrastructure here that clearly cannot withhold or even take the impact of such weather conditions that we are seeing?
Absolutely, Nhlanhla. It is obvious in the areas where you'd have villages where you've got low-lying bridges. I mean, we should have measures in place for warning and monitoring of water levels, which we don't have to alarm people. I mean, you have sadly seen on the other videos where people could not cross the river and they were trapped, and as a result they could not be evacuated on time. So those are the things that we can solve structurally, but we cannot sit and blame government without looking at the solutions as the professional bodies, like your built environment as well. We have a role to play, I think. Yeah.
Let's bring in Johan Olivier. Of course, he's the CEO of Ilifa Africa Engineers. Johan, you've heard Lungisa's observations. I want to get a sense of what you are taking from, especially the seemingly poor infrastructure that clearly cannot deal with the weather patterns that we have seen in recent times in KZN, and also speak to us about some of the legislative framework in planning as well as delivering of infrastructure to take note of in that particular province.
Thanks, Nhlanhla, for having us. First of all, my condolences to the families of the people that have been affected by the floods, either by losing lives of loved ones or property. So it's a real disaster that we had, and it's going to be felt for a number of years to come. And first of all, I'd just like to put the flood in perspective. So the average annual rainfall for the Durban area is about 1,000 millimeters per annum.
Okay.
And the highest monthly rainfall, average highest monthly rainfall is about 104 millimeters, and it's usually either in February or March.
Right.
The recent floods that we had was between 300 and 400 millimeters of rain in a 24-hour period. So it's obviously very high, it's abnormal, so it's not a common occurrence. So I think we also just need to take note of that. So that together with, we will maybe get later to the geology, etc., of the area. So the spatial planning in the past was done separately based on racial grounds, and so in 2013 the government has promulgated new legislation that's called the SPLUMA Act, Spatial Planning and Land Management, and there they've tried to really address all the issues that we had in the past, but still the laws and regulations are enforced quite rigorously in the urban areas and the cities and towns, but Unfortunately, in the rural areas, it's not done. So, and that creates a huge problem if the stormwater is not managed properly, and if the houses and the roads are not built according to the standards that they need to be. Then, as soon as we've got floods, there's a catastrophe and there's huge damage to infrastructure.
And of course, that also points directly to the historical as well as current spatial planning. But what are the geological and geographical landscape of the two provinces? You had already started giving some examples of what we are dealing here in KZN, but also speak to the Eastern Cape as well and factors leading to the disaster of this nature.
Yeah, so between the Eastern Cape and KZN, there are very similarities in the geology as well as the geographical landscape. So if I just refer to KZN maybe specifically, we've got more hilly and mountainous areas if we go inland, and we've got these coastal plains next to the sea that comprises mostly sand dunes or very fine sediments. So it's sandy. So as soon as we get high velocity of water on, say, steeper sections, the sand will wash away. So there's not a lot of clay in the material that we get more on the inland and the other provinces where there's cohesion between the material and the particles. So it's sand and it just washes away. So if the stormwater management is done properly around the houses, like berms and channels and pipe systems, etc., then the sand will just wash away, and all the houses are built in the sand. So if we wash the sand away, the foundations will also go and the house will collapse. So we sit with these fine sands close to the coast that's creating also, together with high velocity flow and stormwater, that's creating the problem.
But Lungisa, I want to refer to examples about how other countries have dealt with natural disasters. I look at Tokyo and its earthquake-proof buildings. That's in Japan. Buildings have been built specifically to deal with the kind of weather patterns or seismic activity within that particular region. What kind of lessons can South Africa learn, especially on a structural level?
I think from a structural level, it will be always, I think we have the things on paper. We always struggle to actually put them to action.
Right.
I think we now know that there's these disasters, they're here, and they're having a similar pattern year in, year out. And I think it's time we put measures, and there's integrated planning at local municipalities, and we should have response mechanism to respond to such effects, like your warnings and evacuation plans. I think most importantly, you'll see here our failures were to respond to evacuate people on time before the disaster hits. Like my colleague has mentioned, I mean, a rain of 100 millimeter has struck a disaster in South Africa, but in Taipei and all those areas, they have above double the numbers, and they're still able to manage those rainfall. So I think it's time we up our game, and we have response mechanism in place, and whistles to inform people on time. And it's a project management principle where you identify this risk, have a response mechanism, and of course, these things cannot go without budgets. And I think our government, understandably, coming from the COVID, coming from the disaster last year of looting, all of those things, they add on to how they act, because budget limitations are there. But we have to act, and we have to put the risk measures in place.
Yes, I can hear.
And just as a follow-up, I think the bigger question that I need to ask is, are we really there yet? I mean, you speak about the willingness on the part of government to address some of these challenges when it comes to spatial planning and ensuring that we have the type of buildings that are set up are the types that can withstand, or actually withstand, the kind of weather patterns that we are seeing, as of course, as a direct result of climate change as well. Do you get a sense that there is a willingness or a seriousness to take this matter with the seriousness that it actually deserves?
I think we have to point at history before we can answer such questions, because we have backlog in terms of RDP and easy things that we could easily achieve as a country.
Right.
And we've got backlog on them. And now we have another phase of our challenges, which is the disasters. So I would say, honestly, an honest answer is we're not there yet. There's a lot we can do to improve it. I think our bodies can help and assist government, but there has to be a willing party as well. which is government has to put their part into play. And the professional bodies are there to assist.
Johan, you've heard Lungisa's sentiment there, but I think as a follow-up to you, I want to find out if, can we say that there is the strong integration between town planners, architects, engineers as well, in also ensuring that construction meets the requirements when planning and also building infrastructure in the country?
Yes, I believe, according to me, there is a strong drive from, let's say, the professional body to really implement projects in the correct way. And township developments will also usually start with a town planner, an architect and an engineer. So I think, yes, I believe there's a strong relationship there. As I've said, it's easy in the urban environment to do things according to the book, but it's very, very difficult if there's informal settlement and small housing going up uncontrolled. So there's obviously no town planner or architect or engineer involved in those type of settlements, and that's where the problem is. So I think it's not a regulatory problem. So the towns and cities, I think everything is going fairly well, but it's the more rural development and those settlements. So we need to formalize or get a plan to do that better, because that's not working the way we do it now.
And Lungisa, as we wrap up, of course I do appreciate the fact that you're not a political analyst of any form. You are an engineer. But there are comments that have been made by political leaders, more notably Julius Malema, the leader of the EFF, placing the blame squarely at the feet of government, of course, under the ANC and KZN, to say the houses or the kind of RDPs that are even being built in townships are really not up to scratch, and blaming the ruling party in the province for the kind of buildings that we saw literally collapse within that area. What are some of your observations there? Do you think this is a fair criticism on the part of political parties?
I would say fairly yes, it is a fair criticism. I think it's high time in our country where we should be able to hold people accountable. Yeah. And people have been crying, and it's time now. We're saying government. There is a cut line where we need to actually action these things, and people have been complaining. So I would not say Julius Malema was wrong. I think it's a fair comment, and it's quite easy because it's out there. It's a fact. You cannot deny it, and it points fairly at government lack of accountability and lack of initiative to counteract these things. I mean, we cannot have a situation where after 26 years we're still talking backlog in terms of housing. And how are we going to manage stormwater management and these disasters when we can't manage the housing backlog on its own? So it is a fair question. I don't agree with the principle entirely. I don't know the context that it was spoken on, but I think the fact is a fact that government's inability to deliver is affecting this. Yes, it is a result of this.
And Johan, as we wrap up as well, and just to get your views as well, whose responsibility really is it to hold building authorities accountable? Just educate us on this aspect.
Yeah, I think it starts with legislation, which I believe is in place, and then it must go down to provincial government and then down to the municipal level. But there are a few things, according to me. The lack of maintenance in the past, I think, is a serious problem. Maintenance was just neglected. So there are so many examples of them. I mean, just look at Eskom load shedding, look at the roads, provincial roads. Many of the municipalities don't have any functional water or sewage treatment plants. So there was a huge lack of maintenance in the past, and I think that is creating difficulties at this stage. So it's going to be very difficult, and it's going to be very costly to do this maintenance. So as soon as infrastructure is past its serviceable life, then it's very expensive. You can almost rebuild it. So I think that is also a serious problem that we will need to address. That maintenance is important. We need to do regular maintenance, and we need to do upgrading of infrastructure. I'm not talking even about new infrastructure, just the existing infrastructure, to keep that going. And as soon as you don't do maintenance, then all kind of problems occur, and it's a bad circle.
Thank you very much for your time, Johan. That's Johan Olivier. He's the CEO of Ilifa Africa Engineers, as well as Lungisa Sishuba, the Managing Director of Onset Construction. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. They've been giving us just a professional perspective on the part of engineers as to the devastation that we have seen in KZN and buildings, like I said a short while ago, simply collapsing in front of people's eyes. Well,